Season 1, Episode 2. Welcome to Forever Break Podcast. Now, coming to you live. Not really. From a sunset-soaked beach in Bali. Also totally not true. Here are your hosts, Lianne and Corey.
All right, well, welcome everyone to our episode today on meditation and breathing, and thank you so much, voiceover guy. Isn't he just the best?
No need to thank me. I'm just doing what it takes to get paid. $5.
Aren't we all, voiceover guy? Aren't we all?
God, $5 sounds nice.
Right?
All right, well, on today's pod, we are going to discuss the widely popular topic of meditation and breathing. What is meditation and what does it do? And we'll explore the balance between the conscious and the subconscious.
Then we are going to talk about our 3-day meditation retreat that we went to in India, which was great. Then we're going to have an interview with Harvard Med School faculty member and meditation expert, Christopher Willard.
The doctor. The good doctor.
He is a good doctor. Be sure to check out the Forever Break website to take an even deeper dive into any of these topics.
Foreverbreak.com. It's got all the answers.
Do it.
Literally.
Do it.
Quick quote.
Think of all of the beauty still left around you and be happy. And that's from Anne Frank.
Focus on.
So meditation is a practice where an individual uses a technique such as mindfulness or focusing the mind on a particular object, thought, or activity to train attention and awareness and achieve a mentally clear and emotionally calm and stable state.
One popular type of meditation is open monitoring meditation. This is where you pay attention to all of the things happening around you and you simply notice everything without reacting, which is kind of in contrast to what a lot of meditation seems to be, which is more like a singular focus type thing, right?
Yeah, and I think a myth buster that would be for meditation is, because, okay, when we went to meditate in India, that was the first time I've ever done meditation, and I got the giggles. And
as you do.
And I think meditation, this image that, especially this is what I had, was like, you know, the enlightened Buddhist or whatever, and
Okay.
And then we showed up in Kerala, and it was nothing like that at all.
No, it really wasn't. This was, it was really, really nice. We were set in nature, and I think that the best thing about this was because we both had very limited experience, Lianne none, me just a little bit. And the woman who was the lovely Karen Sivan, who we highly recommend if you're going to go to Kerala, India, look her up and do a meditation retreat with her because she makes it. She's very good at teaching people who have done it, who are doing it for the first time.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that was just so important to us because she just said, you know, there's no rules. You can't mess up. If you say something or you sneeze or whatever, like I'm not going to slash you with a ruler.
I mean, I was like hurting myself on the inside though, because it was more of a competition between you and I that you're not actually aware that we were having. But it was like, okay, I'm not allowed to move until I see him move at least.
So what we signed up for was 3 days, and each day had 2 1-hour sessions, and it was 20 minutes of sitting meditation, then 20 minutes of walking meditation, and then another 20 minutes of sitting. We really, really struggled, like we said, in terms of the just keeping the singular focus, which was just kind of counting our breaths and focusing on one spot, maybe just like a meter out in front of us. But the best part was the walking meditation. We couldn't help, but we couldn't make eye contact because we would just, if we would have just absolutely started giggling, and it was cultish.
Oh my God. Okay, let me just paint the picture for you guys. So we were on Karen's roof, and there you can, you know, it's all open and you can see out to the jungle-lined streets around us. And there was a couple of times where there was just someone walking past, and I could just see their little head look up at us, even though I'm not supposed to be looking out around me. And I just kind of thought, you have to imagine you have 3 grown people all walking out with their hands in front of them, almost like zombie-ish, very apocalyptic. And just like looking at the ground for 20 minutes. And you don't know what pace to go. I don't know what.
There's no rules. That's the thing, guys, is that with meditation, it is your own thing. Make it what you want. I think the idea behind it is just to sit in silence with yourself for a little bit. And if you can, just trying to practice that idea of mindfulness, which we keep talking about during this season, and just trying to gain some control over your thoughts and wondering, why did I have that thought, and letting that thought spin for a little bit, but then consciously making the effort to bring it back. And we really actually found, even after just 3 days, that we started to gain a little bit more control. And there were some positives that we took from it, even though we kind of saw the process of it at first being a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, and like even times like now, for example, when we've got the pandemic, and when you go off to do the grocery shop, it's almost like you're waving off and Godspeed, my son, and just little things like not touching your face. Obviously, naturally, you're not supposed to touch your face in a supermarket, so you obviously want to touch your face so much. And this meditation actually came in so handy because we had mosquitoes and things like that, and that was the whole process. Was like, just ignore them, just let the world be. Mm-hmm. And there's been times in the grocery store where I've just wanted to itch my face so much, and I've just been like, no, remember Karen. Remember Karen. So it's
find your mantra.
Helpful.
Let's dig deeper.
I mean, this led us to asking the question, why do people meditate? And there are many reasons, including to limit stress, anxiety, becoming more self-aware, but one of the main reasons seems to be to tap into a person's subconscious.
Our conscious part of the brain basically controls our thoughts. That inner monologue we all have yapping at us all day. Although I did read a study where not everyone has that inner voice, which is really interesting. But that's a topic for another time.
Mutants.
I know, right? It's so strange. It must feel so lonely.
I bet you LeBron doesn't.
That means nothing to me. I don't watch basketball.
Oh, it does mean something.
I don't watch foosball.
Oh,
damn it. And then you've got your subconscious. So that's the part of the brain that stores things like memories, habits, and skills. And, like the old saying, it's like riding a bike. That type of skill is stored in our subconscious, not our conscious.
Absolutely. It is possible for us to tap into the subconscious through practice. Meditation helps us do that just by routinely trying to calm or quiet the thoughts of the conscious mind and opening a path to the subconscious. We're going to dive into this and more with Dr. Christopher Willard, who we are going to talk to next.
Expert interview.
Okay, so we are here with Dr. Christopher Willard, who is a psychologist and educational consultant based in Boston, and he specializes in mindfulness. He's been practicing meditation for 20 years and has led hundreds of workshops around the world. Dr. Willard, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to talk to other humans. So this
is such a good feeling.
I'm not alone. Well, we're going to just kick this off now with question one. So we heard that you spent some time in Dharamshala in India and attended a teaching by the Dalai Lama himself. That's very exciting. And I just have to ask, what's he like in real life?
He's, this was maybe 10, 12 years ago. He's kind of just as charming and hilarious and funny in real life as his kind of persona that comes through the media is. And I'm kind of obsessed with travel.
Yeah.
Been kind of a fun thing. And so I was in India and kind of took was that guy who was backpacking and like rode on top of the bus through the Himalayas and got up there, and he was doing these teachings for a few days, and it's a big crowd of people and people coming from all over the world to hear it. And it was just such a fun, crazy experience with folks from just all over the world, who were there listening to him. And,
that's awesome.
and he was kind of like teasing everybody in the audience and just smiling and laughing.
I love that. I love that that's his real life persona. Like, it's not just a persona, it's just him. That's awesome.
Yeah, because I have heard that. He's like when the people that have seen him speak that I know, they've definitely said something along the lines of, you walk out of there just feeling like he's your buddy.
Totally. Yeah. And like everyone, he's so present that like you feel that presence even in a crowd, because he's just able to be so present and draw you into his charisma, energy, whatever you might want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just infectious. So everyone was walking around smiling.
I wish I was quarantined with him.
Yeah, right. Hey.
So kind of going into your profession here, breathing is such an automatic response for the body. So one of the things that just was curious in our minds, because we were actually just in India back in November and December, and we did a meditation retreat, not in the north, but down in the south. But breathing was such a big focus of it. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are and why is it so important, and what's the correlation between mindfulness and then breathing and meditation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, I feel so lucky that I come from both sort of like an interest in the spiritual side as well as the scientific side. And, breathing is something, of course, we're doing it all day, whether we pay attention to it or not. If you're not breathing, you're, got major issues to worry about. But, the fact is that breathing is both a conscious and deliberate thing that we do and unconscious. So it's automatic and it can be controlled by us. And so as we start to, we can use the breath in a few different ways. It becomes, in meditations, it can become something that we just focus on and our mind wanders off. We notice where it goes and we bring it back to the breath. It's also something that we can use to actually really shift how we feel. So that I heard someone say your breath is like a remote control for your emotional system and your alarm system, your limbic system and your brain and in your body. And so what I started to kind of realize is that, like, as because you can control and regulate your breath, that means you can control and regulate your body, and you can regulate your nervous system, which is basically your brain. So you can regulate your brain and your impulses and your emotions and your attention, and you can regulate all these things just by regulating your breath. So you do something like slow your breath down. And what I heard Kelly McGonigal, who's a stress researcher, she said, you want it to be between about 4 and 6 breaths in a minute, which is not a lot, right? That's like a breath every full breath cycle every 10 or 15 seconds. I'm pretty good at math, I guess, right? I think that's right.
I mean, you've got me thinking about my breathing right now. I'm like,
now we're getting talking about math. But we slow it down that much. And it really does, it shuts off the stress response in the brain. So that what happens if we're stressed out is all the blood is actually flowing in the brain to the amygdala and the limbic system. That's the alarm system in the brain. When it's flowing to that part of the brain, it actually is flowing out of the outer cortices. It's flowing out of the prefrontal cortex where we think things through and we make plans and we pay attention, manage our impulses. It's flowing out of the insular cortex where we do sort of our social reasoning and take perspective and understand other people. And so, like, when we're stressed out, like, that alarm is going off, the blood is flowing there. We're not thinking things through at all. When we regulate the breath, it actually shuts that alarm system down. Now blood is flowing to all the parts of the brain that allow us to think and see clearly, allow us to focus, allow us to regulate and manage our emotions in a different way. And that's part of kind of scientifically, in terms of the neuroscience of this and the physiology of this, that's part of why breathing is such a powerful thing to do. And it helps to just, like, breathe in a little bit shorter, breathe out a little bit longer. Like, that's what really turns the volume down on the alarm and then lets blood start to flow to the rest of the brain. So it's pretty amazing to think about it that way. But I just got to remember every so often, slow my breath down a little bit. Oh, it does make a difference. Yeah.
I mean, I guess in situations in life when you are feeling afraid or I don't know, angry, I've noticed that sometimes if you just take a breath, it's just like, okay, just relax and just take a minute. And I guess that makes sense when you apply it to meditation. It's just like, just
I think
relax.
It was one of the things that we came out of the meditation retreat that we did, kind of talking to each other about and just saying the next time that we're feeling high stress or we're feeling overwhelmed by a situation, that taught us, well, if we just sit there and just breathe, even just for a minute, probably the situation isn't quite what we think, and we can take a little bit of control over it. And so,
in other words, stop being so dramatic.
Yeah. It's like the anger is still there, the anxiety is still there, but it's not taking over. It's like, oh, I'm anxious, but I'm not like believing the story, the horror story about the future or whatever it might be.
Exactly. And can you discuss the difference between the conscious and the subconscious mind and how to find a balance between them through meditation?
Yeah. I mean, I think, to kind of go back to Freud, who kind of popularized this idea of the unconscious and subconscious, there's sort of like the iceberg metaphor, or the ice cube floating in water, right? And a little bit's peeking up, and that's our conscious mind, and our subconscious and unconscious is kind of below, and it's often bigger, and we're not aware of what's always driving our behavior or our emotions and things like that. I think what mindfulness, what meditation, what these contemplative practices can start to do is they help us kind of dive down into that subconscious a little bit, and we can just see it a little bit more clearly. We can get a little bit of like a early warning before that emotion takes us over. We can start to look and see more clearly the patterns that we get caught up in, because we all get caught up in our patterns, right? Something happens, I see something, I read something online, and then my heart speeds up and my blood boils over, and then I say something I regret, or whatever it might be. When we slow down, we start to see that whole process unfolding in real time, and we start to know our own habits that we get into that are usually unconscious, and then we can kind of stop them in their tracks, or we can make a different choice in that moment, right? Like there's that,
we can take control of that situation.
Exactly. We can really do something different. And that's why I think it's, we talk about these practices as like empowering. So it's like, oh, I've got a little more power over my own life, and my own choices. It's not being totally driven by, animal instincts or something.
Yeah. And I definitely think that's what mindfulness is about. That's something, because, we came into this, we're like, okay, well, we're coming from the audience member. We're complete beginners in this kind of topic. And I think one thing that we are learning throughout our interviews is like, oh, actually, mindfulness is just taking control of all your decisions and all of your feelings, and choosing to feel away or accepting to feel away. And it's really nice.
Or at least trying to.
Or at least trying, yes.
So one of the things that's curious about us is that at our retreat, it was 60-minute sessions, and we would do 20 minutes of seated meditation, 20 minutes of walking meditation, which in full honesty was a little hard because we
got the giggles.
We couldn't make eye contact, because it was as much as we were trying to focus, if we made eye contact, we would just start laughing. So we just absolutely could not. But we got through it, and it was really good. But I'm wondering, what are some other different types of meditation that you have taught and practiced? And then what would be the main differences between them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few differences. There's like equanimity practices, and there's concentration practices, and there's visualizations, and there's mindfulness, and there's like loving kindness and compassion practices. And one difference between like a real focused concentration and a mindfulness practice is, let's take, for example, the breath, right? And so you take that, and that's like your anchor, maybe you call it, the object of your awareness, and you focus on that breath. Or maybe it's sounds, or maybe it's sensations in your body, maybe it's a visualization. Well, let's just say, for now, it's the breath. I have this friend that talks about the 3 R's of mindfulness, and you just rest your attention there on your breath. And then pretty soon, pretty soon you're resting your attention on your breath, and your mind starts to wander off. And that happens about half the time in terms of what science says, like your mind just wander off. And you just recognize the fact that it's wandered off, and you recognize where it's wandered off, and then you just gently return to your breath or your body or whatever it is. And that's mindfulness. Mindfulness is the thing where you notice that your mind has wandered, and you notice where it's gone. So the wandering mind is not a problem. Like, in fact, that just gives you more opportunity to notice where your mind tends to go, and get to know, like as we were saying a moment ago, like get to know what your unconscious mind does, what its habits usually are. So you get to know yourself better that way. A concentration practice is more just like focus on your breath. Mind wanders off, just return. Mind wanders off, just return. And so you're building kind of like the muscle of focus and concentration, but you're not building the same level of awareness about what your own unconscious mind and subconscious mind is bubbling up, what your usual patterns and habits are that your brain likes to feed you because of other, conditioning that you've had throughout your life. So these are both really useful. Concentration is kind of like strength training is how I think about it. And mindfulness is a little bit more like you get some strength training, but you're also getting some cross training and some flexibility and that kind of thing in there, if you want to go with like a more physical exercise kind of analogy. So mindfulness practice, it's like mind wanders 1,000 times, just 1,000 chances to get to know your mind better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you kind of bring the question of why into it. And it's more or less like, I'm trying to just focus on my breathing, or I'm just focusing on one thought. But my mind is going to drift, and I allow it to. I just kind of scratch that itch a little bit, if you will, and just say, I'm just going to ponder why that thought might have popped into my head, but then I'm not going to just dwell on it forever. I want to come back to my breath, and just kind of the meditation experience becomes that, which I think is important because I think a lot of people probably get frustrated because they can't do that initially, and they're just like, well, this just isn't for me. But it's like, no, take it easy on yourself and just let that mind go, but then bring it back, and then slowly over time, that'll just become a little bit better. You'll gain a little bit more control over that. I think that's interesting.
And we practice being nice to ourselves. Like, oh, mind wanders off. Okay, just bring it back. Just like a baby crawling off or a puppy wandering off. Like, you can yell at the puppy or the baby, but then you end up with like a, angry, unhappy, mean baby or mean puppy, right? Or you can just be kind. Smile at yourself, smile at your mind, your puppy, your baby. And then you have like this more kind of compassionate, you're sort of building self-compassion really at the same time when we do that. You're still moving it back, but you're doing it with kindness and patience. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And you've been practicing meditation for 20 years now, and you've led workshops all over the world. Can you tell us how do approaches to meditation differ between cultures, if there is any?
Yes. This is so interesting to me because there's so many different kinds of like traditional, meditation practices and contemplative practices, and so many different cultures around the world. And then now that we're in more of like a global society, these are getting shared with each other, and certain ones are becoming like more dominant in other ways. But then at the same time, like, they're all getting adapted by different cultures in different ways. So every culture's got something like meditation in it throughout history, spiritual tradition. But then, now it's amazing to me. I've been invited to do workshops in, I think, like 25 countries. And like, it's just so interesting to see, sort of how mindfulness manifests in Finland and Germany, and why, or why in, Australia or New Zealand, or what it's like to go to Bhutan or India and talk about mindfulness there. I went to, a couple of years ago, I was in India, and they presented it as the first mindfulness summit in India. And I was like, wait a minute.
You're like, no. Yeah, right. It's like the traditional from the.
I'm honored, but let's get real.
Hilarious. But then it's like, being in Brazil, and they have like a rich tradition of like dance or capoeira, like Brazilian martial arts, that have, this sort of like body awareness to them. And, it's just kind of fascinating to see things merge with local cultures in different ways, as it becomes popular, which I think it is because the world everywhere is getting busier and busier and more stressed out. So there's, I think, simultaneously more and more of a desire everywhere to slow down and kind of do one thing at a time, and integrate or reintegrate mindfulness into different cultures and different places in the world. So
yeah, and I feel like there really is something there with it, because so many countries and so many different people are taking part in this, and they're seeing the benefits and they're seeing the positives come from it. So I think it is definitely starting to become more of like a lifestyle choice, and so it's getting so popular now.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Yeah, it definitely has a mass world appeal, and like you said, as things continue to get busier and busier, people are going to continue to look for ways outlets to escape from that, or just ways to just kind of calm their lives down a little bit. I am curious. There is this, and maybe this is just me, but I've been just my whole life, my dad's been a person who's meditated for the majority of my life, for at least 20, 30 years on a daily basis. And one of the things that he first talked about when he started doing it was the idea of enlightenment. And it just kind of seems like this mythical, almost fairy tale-ish thing of, you just picture, like when you think of for me, enlightenment brings up like a floating Buddha in my head, which is probably really wrong. But I'm really wondering what enlightenment means to you, and have you achieved it in your years of practice, or is it kind of like Fight Club, where if you've achieved enlightenment, you don't talk about enlightenment?
Well, I think this is such a fun...
Because if so, we can go off the record,
I think this is such a fun question. Like, and I think when I started, I my vision of it was like, some kind of like floating on a cloud kind of thing. And over time, I think what's interesting to me is that all my understandings of everything have evolved over time. I think we have to, one thing I think meditation and these practices have helped me do is to open up to my own kind of, just letting myself evolve, letting myself change. And my definitions of what enlightenment is have kind of changed. I thought about joining a monastery when I was younger, and I didn't think I would do it permanently, but for a few years, I still kind of wish I'd done that. But at the same time, like being in the regular world with, a job and kids and relationships. And, it's like, in some ways that's harder than being in a monastery and trying to live a good life that way.
Simple life.
It's really true.
And I think in some ways, like mindfulness used to be floating on a cloud. And a couple of days ago, I was talking to my friend Ron, and he was, we were like, maybe enlightenment is just, being able to manage our emotions, like to not get overwhelmed by stuff, not get overwhelmed by it quite so often, or to understand what our own motivations are, to, act in accordance with our best self and with our values most of the time. And even the story of the Buddha, and again, there's so many, meditation is not limited to Buddhism, of course, but, there's sort of debate in different traditions, like, when he was enlightened and he chased away the demon, Mara kind of ran away. Was that it? Was he like, it was like a light switch? It was on and then it was on forever? Or was it like Mara, the demon, came back and they'd kind of wrestle and talk and debate, and it was like a dimmer switch? It's like he had his good days and his bad days in a sense. And I think, that's to me that's even kind of a debate in some of the spiritual aspects of meditation. Like it's not necessarily a light switch. But I'm still just as motivated, right, not believing in a cloud at this point. So yeah,
that seems fair.
It's like chasing something that you can't perfect, right? It's almost like in the same realm as being a musician. Like there's nobody that has ever just been like, well, that's absolutely, you can't be
Never
any
improve,
better on a piano.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know. There's a couple of real good classical players. I personally would like to play like Debussy, and then I'd be happy. But And so what are some of the biggest hurdles you find adults need to overcome to begin a healthy relationship with meditation?
I think finding the time, finding the motivation. I think it helps when we have a community, and that, in some ways that's harder now, in some ways that's easier now. To have a community of people, whether it's online or off, just like getting physical exercise. It's easier if you've got a running buddy or someone you meet at the gym. It's easier if you've got someone who you can sit in practice with, or a community that you can go and sit with once or twice a week. So I do think community is really key to helping us get going. Not all of us are self-starters. I think also like starting small. Too many people are like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to meditate for an hour a day. And then they start and it's like, they get 20 minutes in and they're like, F this, I give up. I'm terrible. I can't do this.
Yeah, I'm done.
Start with 1 minute. It's like, what's the meditation equivalent of like couch to 5K? It's like that kind of, attitude of like, let's start by walking around the block and eventually we start jogging, and like, let's start with 1 minute, let's start with 5 breaths and let's move it up to 10 and then 2 minutes and then 5 minutes and build from there. And if we fall off the wagon, we just start back up again the next day. I think having a routine helps. My practice was most consistent when it was like, I was a teacher like 20 years ago, and I'd get out of school at 3:00. I'd get home. I'd go for a run for half an hour. Right after my run, I'd sit down on my meditation cushion for 20 minutes. And it was just part of the routine. Now my schedule is all over the place, so it's harder to maintain a practice. It used to be first thing in the morning. Now it's like my kids jump on my head first thing in the morning. And, so these things make it difficult, but a routine is really helpful. I find fitting it into an existing routine that you already have can really help.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's one of the hardest things that people have is routine. But one thing that's unique to our time right now, obviously, is having some time. Yeah. And so if you are two parents who are at home with your kids and just being like, you know what, I've got breakfast and everything this morning, take an extra half hour, an hour, and just stay in the bedroom or wherever you want to be and just, get yourself centered, because as we kind of talked about at the beginning, as all the days get flowing and you just don't know which one is which, I think that just spending a little bit of time with yourself during this kind of unique situation is really important. I'm really curious about this because, having traveled to India, I think that you can relate to our experience of plane landing, gets pulled up before it even pulls up to the gate. People are already getting off. And then in that culture specifically, there is a mad rush like no other that I've ever seen. And to get off of, to just the hurry up and wait mentality. And so you talk about this in what your article, Be a Mindful Travel Warrior. And you say that is actually what a perfect time to just find some calmness within an otherwise sort of chaotic situation. And so what is it about that kind of situation, or travel in general, that seems to trigger people's and bring up their intensity levels? And what are some actionable practices to find some inner peace during these times?
Yeah, and travel, especially travel in a place like India, as you know, is just all kind of hurry up and wait. And it just is so agitating, and, to kind of be like rushing somewhere and then sitting around, and it can be so stressful. But if we can kind of lean into it and learn how to go with the flow, then I think, that's, we learn how to do that on our meditation cushions, and we can start to bring that out into the world. And, travel, I remember just noticing that like 10 years ago, and I used to, travel a lot for work. Get on a plane once or twice a month, and go to a dozen countries a year, and like but there is that just sort of like everyone's so anxious, everyone wants to get off the plane, but it's like you all stand up and then like tilt your head to the side and they're just stuck there. Such a moment that it's like you're not doing anything. Standing up doesn't help at all. And so I started trying to bring in just from when they say we're going to start descending, to being able to get off the plane, just trying to stay still. Someone wants to get past me. Obviously, I'm not going to be super passive aggressive and not let them pass me, but I always try to get in a window seat anyway. But but that's a moment where it's like you can just sit with all those emotions of I really want to get off the plane. Oh my gosh, there's this sort of social pressure to stand up, and noticing
when
that.
There's someone next to you, for sure.
Right. And such a good opportunity to really sit with all those urges and impulses and, wanting to get off there and just be with it. Or these other moments we have traveling, when we're at the gate, it's like, do you really want to be the first one on the plane? I don't know if I do. I could be, but I could also just, sit here and wait and notice the anxiety and notice the kind of group anxiety of wanting to get on the plane. It's like, well, you're all just going to be dying to get off the plane. Why are you all lining up to get on it first? So it's, and then, or being in India and just, it's like, who knows when the bus is coming, in 3 hours or in 3 minutes? I don't know. I'll just sit here at this bus stop and watch everybody. People watch it. Mindfulness practice too, especially in traveling in a place that's foreign to us.
Particularly in somewhere like India, where there's just so much going on, and you're just kind of you have to sit back and just take it all in, because you're like, wow, this is a lot.
Sensory overload over there, and it was fascinating to witness.
Yeah,
it's such a cool, amazing place.
We loved it there.
I've been there 3 times now, and I might even be able to go back later this year if we were able to travel. But it's, I just love just watching the street scene, try to figure out who are these two people? What are they negotiating? What are they talking about? Invent backstories for people, and it's so interesting to feel.
That's what I always do when you can't understand them. You're like, okay, I think this is happening. Right, and then Corey will be like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know. I just this is what's going on in my head. So moving on to your book, Raising Resilience. It mixes the latest science with Eastern wisdom as a practical guide to pass along certain positive traits to children from parents or educators. And what got you interested in relating mindfulness to children, and why is it so important to learn these traits early on in life?
Yeah, I mean, I think they make us resilient, and so to me, that book was I don't know, I'd written a bunch of books about mindfulness for kids, and I actually wanted to tack in a slightly different direction. So while it's a lot about mindfulness, I was at a conference and someone kind of raised this question, what's going to be the next big trend after mindfulness? I was kind of thinking, well, what if we reverse that question? We say, what's the next thing before mindfulness? Or what should we teach before we teach mindfulness, and not just rush off teaching every kid breathing? And so that book actually does a deep dive on some spiritual principles and the science behind them, really. So it's like, what's the science behind patience or behind determination and the these other kind of spiritual values that are really universal across cultures, hard work and honesty and ethical behavior and kindness and generosity and gratitude and all kinds of things like this that are part of every spiritual tradition. How are they cultivated in different spiritual traditions? And then what does science have to say about them? Like, how can, even as we become in some ways a more secular society, how can we keep the good traditions? Like, I don't say grace with my family before dinner, but we practice gratitude anyway, right? And so, like, keeping what really works and has worked, or community, is really important in spiritual practices. And we don't have exactly a spiritual community, our family, but we try to create a community, that's because community is so important. And so all these values, I think, are really important, whether we're spiritual or religious or not. And so that's a lot of what that book is about. How do we maintain this, for our families and ourselves?
And I guess when you're a kid as well, say look at learning a language or something like that, or a sport or a hobby. When you're younger, those habits develop a lot easier. You're like a sponge, right? So if you're teaching these ethical, nice, mindful practices as a kid, then that's just guaranteeing the odds are going to be better. As an adult, it's going to be a more ethical, more rounded, more socially aware adult. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I was curious about that too, and if that was something that kind of came to your mind, of being that kids are such sponges. It was like, well, let's start, why not instill in them a mindset of gratitude at a younger age and kind of get them into a rhythm of just centering themselves and going into that mindfulness trait and practicing that, so that as they get more, adult, maybe that's a way to ingrain it into their subconscious, so it almost becomes on the same level as breathing. And I just didn't know if that was kind of where you were at with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many of these things, we're just trying to, to give an example, something like gratitude, which I think of as kind of like a wisdom practice to appreciate what's good and actually help ourselves see more clearly and override what evolutionary psychologists would call the negativity bias, which is we see things as worse than they are. And then when we're stressed out, we see things as way worse than they actually are. It's this kind of system that keeps us safe and kept our ancestors safe, but it's not always so useful in the modern world. But gratitude overrides this and helps us see more clearly and boosts our mood and all of that. So like, with my son, he's 5 years old. We do a little gratitude before bedtime, and we do what we call happy thoughts. We talk about the happy things from the day. And of course, he's 5. So he's like, let's do 1,000,000 happy thoughts. I'm like, you're just trying to not go to bed.
Nice try.
And so he gets like really into it. And yet I know when he's like 10, 12, there'll become a day that I'm like, let's talk about happy thoughts. Let's, practice gratitude. And his eyes are going to like roll back into his head with like, oh my God, Dad, you're so lame. But the fact is, you can't ask someone a question, even if they roll their eyes at you, they're still asking themselves that question. It's kind of a little public speaking trick also, to ask a lot of questions in public speaking. Mm-hmm. But like, so he'll have to ask himself that question. He'll roll his eyes at me, but he'll still be thinking about it. And what that actually means is he's starting to internalize that, of asking himself at the end of every day, what went well today. So that when he's between 12 and 18, he's not going to tell me, but he's going to be still practicing it himself. And then when he comes home from college, he'll want to maybe, do it again. And we'll talk about, what's going well in our days as we sit around the dinner table at Thanksgiving or something. And it won't be, he'll be able to not be rebelling against us anymore, but he'll have fully internalized that. And so that's my hope, is that seed that we're planting now then grows later and gets internalized and goes through a time of not wanting me around or my wife around, but he'll be working that out on his own. So that then helps kids grow up more resilient with more perspective. And just as being aware of our breathing becomes a habit, then being aware of gratitude starts to become a habit as well.
Yeah, it's really true, because gratitude was something that was kind of brought into my life from a past employer about 4 or 5 years ago, and just something that I've tried to just keep a focus on throughout. And they kind of described it in the sense of, if you wake up and you think of, 3 things that you're grateful for before your feet hit the floor that day, it makes it a lot harder to have a bad day.
Absolutely.
And I liked that so much. So I started practicing it. And then one of the things I found early on was I'm just having a hard time coming up with things to be grateful for. But then it's like what we were talking about before, and not punishing yourself and saying, well, there's a really nice breeze coming through my window right now. What a nice thing to wake up to, and just really breaking it down.
Have a window that breeze comes through. Yeah.
Exactly. And just like having these, then it becomes easier and easier to find these things that you can be grateful for, which kind of over that amount of time, the last 4 or 5 years, has shifted my mindset to being, I was always kind of an optimist, but now I think I'm so annoyingly optimistic that it just drives Lianne crazy.
It's true. I'm English. I like to moan. We're British. Like I don't feel negativity, but I like to moan about it. And he's just so positive sometimes.
They'll be like, oh, it's so cold outside, I don't want to do anything. And I'm like, well, we can just have a nice fire and get cozy in here. I think it's going to be a great day.
Yeah.
And I think, like, starting with the small stuff to be grateful for, like, I think, and then it becomes just that habit throughout the day. You just start looking for things because you're making a gratitude list at the end of the day or the next morning. Your brain's already kind of scanning for that stuff around you. So
yeah, it's really true. Well, we really appreciate your time. We know that you're busy, even though we've got a weird, crazy global situation. Anybody that's taken the time to talk to us about this stuff, we're just so thankful for. So we really appreciate it, and thanks. I think we learned a lot.
Thank you both. Yeah, take care.
Interview digestion.
Thank you, Dr. Willard. Well, that was just awesome.
I can't believe he met the Dalai Lama.
It's hard. Every time, I've only met one other person who's met the Dalai Lama, and they all have that same type of vibe once they do it of, he just makes everyone in that room feel so comfortable.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it means to be enlightened.
Yeah, just to make everyone want to flock around you and be happy with you.
I think he was secretly enlightened, and he just didn't want to say it.
I think we're pretty close to being enlightened.
Maybe you are.
Yeah, and probably me.
Yeah. No, I feel like I'm a ways away. Anyway, what a fantastic conversation. I hope that you guys learned as much as we did. And if you are a parent interested in trying to incorporate some of these ideas into your family life, his book, Raising Resilience, I think is a really good place to start. You can start to get some of those practices ingrained in your kids, and I think the side benefit to that is something that we talked about, where it's going to just all of a sudden become a habit for yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, that on top of that as well, obviously you want the best for your kid, but hey, that's going to help the parents too, right?
Yeah.
If you just got a kid that's just super polite, super thoughtful of the people around them.
I really like that metaphor that he used in terms of you don't go from sitting on the couch to running a 5K. If you're thinking about starting to meditate, maybe sitting down for an hour right away isn't the best idea. Maybe just like say, you know what? Today I'm going to do a minute.
You know what, everyone? I'm seeing a theme. All of our experts are saying, guys, just this is what people do. They try too much too soon. So I think just taking everything in stride seems to be a common theme amongst all of our interviews today.
And be kind to yourself.
Yeah, be kind to yourself. Be fair. You know, you're not an athlete. You're not an enlightened Dalai Lama. It's okay. It's okay for you to not be so good at things to start out. Yeah. It's only natural.
Take it further.
So if anybody has heard that and they're interested in finding out more, you can head over to drchristopherwillard.com and check out his website, where you can get more information on any of his books and just about what he does, really.
Yeah, to get off to an easy start with a healthy, consistent meditation practice, we, along with our producers, recommend the app Headspace. There you can find a handful of free meditations, and if you like what you see, they have an affordable subscription-based service as well.
You have an affordable subscription-based service as well, yeah?
Sometimes the slurs happen. But honestly, it is a good thing to have. My dad has been sending me links to try out his subscription to different apps like Calm and Headspace for the last couple of years. And I've done it here and there, but I could definitely be better. And I think that is another goal, is just to try and sit in some silence every now and again, because the world's a noisy place, isn't it, Lee?
Yeah, not so much in northern Wisconsin, but in other places.
Yeah.
It is very noisy.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you learned as much as we did on this episode. And if you do want to explore more of Dr. Chris's work, you can visit his website, drchristopherwillard.com, where you can get some more information on his published works, his workshops, and even some online learning tools.
Yeah, on the next and third episode, we are going to be looking into personality types. What are they? Are they accurate? And we're going to be learning more about ourselves and discussing results with an expert in the study.
We thank you again, and now let's take it over to Mr. Voiceover Guy.
Thanks, Lianne. Subscribe now to the Forever Break podcast on your favorite platform: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. If you enjoyed this episode, help us out and leave a 5-star review. And remember, you can find all the juicy details discussed in this episode in the show notes at foreverbreak.com/podcast.